I met our guest speaker, Tristan Henry, and his spouse, Mary Beth, along with their 3 sons in 2020 as part of the Portage Kids peaceful protest near City Hall. This continues. I've met or become reacquainted with many amazing people on that corner. I've been enamored with the Henry family because of the generosity that I see and the follow through on co-leading this group. Tristan is the father of 3 boys, the son of 2 proud Jamaican parents, and the partner of 1 awesome lady. Born in Ontario, Canada, Tristan migrated to Michigan in 2002 for school. He is a graduate of Andrews University in the field of medical laboratory science. He's been a resident in our community for 11 years, and building genuine, long-lasting relationships is his life mission. Welcome, Tristan, to our virtual pulpit.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. First off, I'd just like to thank everyone who's behind the scenes and also on the forefront of this ministry. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that Kimberly has extended for me to speak. I'd also like to thank Reverend G for sharing this virtual pulpit with me. Really appreciate this opportunity. So I'd like to first off start by asking a question. What is the first image that comes to mind when you think of the word immigrant? Hold that picture in your mind. We'll definitely revisit it at the end. I'd like to start by defining what an immigrant is. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines the word as a person who comes to a country to take up permanent residence. The Latin migrare has the meaning to move from one place to another. I am an immigrant. My story begins 5 hours east of this location. I am Canadian. What's interesting is that you could still drive 5 hours north and still be in Michigan, but I digress. Not only am I Canadian, but I am a first-generation Canadian. Both my mother and father were born and raised and emigrated from the beautiful island of Jamaica, and they emigrated from Jamaica to Canada. I was raised in a culturally rich house. Not only that, I was also raised in a culturally diverse city. I was born in Southern Ontario, really close to Toronto. I had many friends with cultural backgrounds that ranged from Indian to Portuguese, from Pakistani to Italian. I have truly been blessed by being able to break bread with these friends. A story comes to mind when and it wasn't just once, many times, I would forget my house key at home before hopping on the bus in the morning. And when I would arrive home, I would come home to a locked door as my mom was still at work. Those were times when, depending on your little local community, was very important. And my friend across the street from me, his family was always hospitable and would invite me in. And being that they're of a different cultural background there, being Indian, they would share like a naan-like bread with some yogurt and something curried. And though it was strange to me by being different culturally, I thoroughly enjoyed that meal. And it's more important than the meal was the hospitality that was extended. I also remember when my family was able to extend that same hospitality. My mom would cook some escovitch fish. And if you've never experienced that, it's a Jamaican fried fish that is soaked in a pickled sauce with lots of onions, carrot strips, allspice, and with our signature Scotch bonnet pepper for some nice warmth to the tongue and some good flavor. After my friend tried some of my mom's fish, he couldn't stop talking about it for the following week about how much he enjoyed it. And just thinking about these exchanges of culture that I was able to experience, it's been a huge part of my upbringing, helping to shape who I am today. Let's fast forward through elementary and jump right to the end of high school. I went to a Christian private school where I met my beautiful, loving best friend and partner. And when thinking about college or university, we were deciding which one to go to. And within my Christian denomination, there are some universities spread throughout. And my wife decided to go to the one in Western Canada, and I decided to go to the one in Southwest Michigan, as it was the closest. And one of the biggest deciding factors for that choice, as simple as it was for an 18-year-old at the time, was my dad said, if I chose the closer school, and I'll paraphrase as to what he would have said in that time, he's like, I'll get you a nice manual car if you go to the closer school. And for me, that was a no-brainer. And my choice for schooling at that point became clear and very evident. And there lies the beginning of the next chapter of my life story. International students pay the most in tuition because as non-residents, their families don't pay state taxes. So that would make sense. So my choice to come to the United States wasn't the cheapest. Beyond tuition, we came across the first fee of immigration. Student visas, in my case, being a Canadian, I had to get an I-20, and the application that you would apply for is the I-901, which has a filing fee of $350. So that was our first fee that we had to encounter. And at this point, I'll do another time skip to graduation. I now have a bachelor's degree in clinical laboratory science. It's time to work. I was advised to apply for a transition visa known as an OPT, or optional practical training, which is only available to students on the F1 student visa class immigration status. The application cost for the OPT is currently $410. So that's another fee incurred. After 1 year of employment, I learned about options that were available to Mexican and Canadians through a program called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And this status was called the TN1 national visa. And that was definitely the cheapest visa I'd experienced yet. It was about $56 every year. And later it turned to every 3-year renewal. And I had to pay, to be in this country by proving that I had employment still. So I needed a letter from my employer, went to the border. It was pretty easy going until about 4 years into that process of getting this TN1 visa. The rules changed, or what I later figured out was someone at the border had overlooked some paperwork that I needed to apply for. And what I needed was a certificate certifying that I was certified. Yes, I did say that. I needed a certification to certify that I was certified, for which I do actually take a board exam for this degree. So it was kind of an interesting third party that had to verify this. But nonetheless, that incurred another cost. This company was formerly known as CGFNS, and the certificate that you needed was called a visa screen. When I was asked for this visa screen at the border, during one of my TN1 renewals, my heart sank to the bottom of my belly. Now, if you haven't crossed the border a lot, you probably haven't experienced that sinking feeling of knowing that you could be turned back, or in my case, I could even be kicked out of the country. So after I told the officer that I had never heard of it, $615, and 3 months later, without legally being able to work, my certificate came in the mail. My saving grace in that moment was my partner had finished her degree in Michigan. At this point, she had migrated now from Western Canada down here to finish her degree. And I was able to go under a trade dependent status under her TN1 visa. So fortunately, she had been here to kind of save me. I'd made sure when my partner was looking for work on her OPT, or she was on her OPT and working towards her TN1. I had ensured that when HR was signing her contract and when they're putting all those details together, that specifically highlighted, triple highlighted, put in for them to sponsor you for your green card, because I knew that was the next logical step. So you can get work sponsorship. So there's pretty much two routes to permanent residence in this country, two main routes. Work sponsorship is one of them. And number two is through family sponsorship, or if you get married to an American citizen or whatnot. Those are like the two easiest routes there. So after Working for about 7 years on a TN1 status, we both finally were sponsored by her employer. The employer paid about, $580 plus. After applying for the I-131, the I-765, and finally the I-485, our total was about $1,070 each per green card. So multiply that by 2. We are currently in the process of becoming naturalized citizens, and that end 400 applications, about 725 with biometric fees and paperwork. So for a Canadian to become a United States citizen with a US bachelor's degree or higher, the total cost is about $3,226. So that's kind of the cost we've accumulated in our path, and everyone's immigration journey is different. I'd like to delve into a little bit of history of immigration in this country. It's quite an interesting story, and hopefully you're not bored to death by history. I know sometimes it, just like math, history kind of has that negative feeling of being, boring or what from childhood. But I, in a lot of cases, think it's just how it's taught, of course. But we'll start with our First Nation explorers. They arrived 20,000 plus years ago. And 400 years ago, 400 plus years ago, in the 1600s, the Europeans showed up on the East Coast. The British went to New England and Virginia, the Dutch in New York, and the Spanish in Florida. Naturalization in the 1790 allowed, specifically the Naturalization Act of 1790 allowed for free white persons of good character, which was in air quotes. Good character was definitely in their definition of what they defined as people who can migrate. By this time, 1 in 5 of those who occupied the US at that point, or who had migrated here, were of African heritage. By 1815, first major wave of immigration lasts until the Civil War of 1861. By 1819, the Steerage Act is put in place because many are arriving sick and dying of the long, cramped journey. This act required better ships, better conditions for the ships, and people not to be crammed like sardines. By 1848, first anti-immigrant political party forms in response to increasing numbers of Germans and Irish. So it's interesting that we see as everyone migrates in here, each person becomes the othered group. So at this point, the Irish make up about 1/3 of all immigrants in the US between 1820 to 1860. During the 1850s, many Chinese workers had immigrated to America, working in gold mines. They built railroads. They worked in agriculture. In 1880, the second wave of immigration begins. Majority of them are from Southern, Eastern, and Central Europe. By 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act is passed, barring Chinese immigrants from entering the US. 1891, Immigration Act further restricts who can enter the United States. By 1892, Ellis Island opens up as the first immigration station, mainly processing third-class passengers, also known as the poor Europeans. By 1907, United States and Japan signed a gentleman's agreement allowing a limited amount of Japanese emigration to business and professional men only. By 1910, 3/4 of New York City's population consisted of new immigrants and first-generation Americans. 1917 leads to yet another immigration act. This act requires a literacy test for all new immigrants and halts most Asian immigration, except the Philippines, which was under US colonial rule at that point. Immigration Act of 1924 adds a nationality quota. So if you're from certain countries, you're going to have a very limited amount of people who will be allowed to come in from there. The US Border Patrol is established that same year, 1924, and that year they begin to crack down on illegal border crossings through Mexico and Canada. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of people who were crossing the border at that point were Chinese and other Asian immigrants who had been barred. In 1942, the Bracero program was established to allow temporary workers from Mexico to fill labor shortages during World War II. By 1948, the United States passed their first refugee and resettlement law to deal with war-torn European countries post-World War II. In 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act formally ends the 72-year Asian exclusionary acts that were established. By 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act ends the nationality quota. President Lyndon B. Johnson called the old immigration system un-American. Quota system is replaced by a 7-category system emphasizing family reunification and skilled immigrants. Family reunification became pretty much the #1 driving force in US immigration at that point. 1986, President Ronald Reagan signs into law the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which grants amnesty to more than 3 million illegal immigrants. By the 2000s, which I'll kind of summarize, there wasn't much that happened in the 2000s, but we had 2001, there was the DREAM Act, which never passed. It was shot down by Congress multiple times. DACA, which was to temporarily shield those dreamers so they couldn't be deported. And the DACA was all the children who were brought here illegally, but without their own choice, of course. They were illegally migrated here. And it was an act to try to keep them, or legislation that tried to keep them here. Then the last president enacted 2 executive orders to restrict travel from 6 majority Muslim countries. For those of you who remember that in more recent history, I believe that was 2017. So remember the question that I asked at the beginning. Keep that in mind, because in light of the history I just shared, our thoughts then go to, what does it mean to be an American? The answer to that question will be a bit subjective, as I think we all have a modified version. I do believe that we all share the thoughts of importance pertaining to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the first question I had asked was, what is the first image that comes to mind when you think about the word immigrant? Well, I challenge you to look in the mirror. That is the face of an immigrant. This is the face of an immigrant. All of us at some point in our history have migrated here, and keeping that in mind helps us better define what it means to be an American. And I'd like to more loosely define, because technically people from Canada are American if you define it under a bigger branch of the continental perspective. And so I have been American technically all along, but more North American. So have we arrived at a perfect America? I still think we are traveling toward that destination. So are we there yet? Not quite.
Thank you, Tristan. Your story is not the one that I think of when I think of immigration. And I appreciate hearing one more of many different experiences.